The gravel crunched under Jack Rain's boots as he stepped out of his pickup truck and onto the long, winding driveway of his new home. A modest ranch-style property nestled at the edge of whispering pines, the house was surrounded by towering trees and quiet fields. It was far from the noise of the city, and even farther from the chaos Jack had left behind in his previous life. A life that involved battlefields, chain of command pressure, and decisions that weighed heavily long after sunset. He was done with that now, or so he thought. Jack, a retired Special Forces commander, had moved to Whispering Pines for peace. His service had earned him 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and a medical discharge after a mission in Eastern Europe had gone sideways. The bullet fragments in his hip were a constant reminder of how close he'd come to not making it out. Now, all he wanted was to fish, grill out on Sundays, and enjoy a life not lived on alert. The first few days were uneventful. He unpacked, fixed a few things around the house, and made friends with the mailman, Rick, a Vietnam vet, who instantly respected Jack's bearing. The air was fresh, the sunsets were golden, and the lake behind his property sparkled like something out of a dream. For the first time in years, Jack allowed himself to believe he might finally be free. That belief ended on day 6. It was early morning when the knock came, sharp and rhythmic like a drill sergeant's bark. Jack opened the front door to find a woman in her late 50s, dressed in a pastel pink tracksuit and holding a clipboard so tightly her knuckles were white. "Good morning," she chirped, voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Karen Mathers, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. Welcome to the neighborhood." Jack blinked. "Thanks. I wasn't aware there was an HOA here." Karen's smile faltered, just briefly. "Oh, we're not listed on public listings yet, but we are very active. Now, I've brought the paperwork for your membership. Dues are $300 a month, payable quarterly, and I'll need you to sign this acknowledgement that you agree to all community rules." Jack looked down at the thick stack of fine print. "Yeah, I'm not interested." Karen froze. "Excuse me? I bought this house outright. I checked the deed. There's no binding HOA agreement tied to this property. I'm not obligated to join anything." Her eyes narrowed. "Sir, everyone here follows the rules. You must be part of the HOA if you want to live in Whispering Pines." Jack folded his arms, his voice calm but firm. "Then maybe you need to check with your legal department. I'm not signing anything." Karen's cheeks flushed red. "This isn't up for debate. If you don't comply, I'll have to take action." "Do what you need to do." Jack replied and shut the door. He thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. Over the next few days, the harassment began subtly. First, it was a parking violation notice stuck on his mailbox, even though his truck was well within his driveway. Then came the trash bin complaint, placed out too early. The letter said, though Jack had only followed the city schedule. Karen walked by often, always with a group of her HOA disciples, 3 women and 1 wiry man who never spoke. They would pause near Jack's property, whispering, glancing, and jotting notes into binders like they were FBI agents gathering intel. Rick, the mailman, noticed too. "You stirred up the queen bee," he said one afternoon, handing Jack the mail. "Karen's run this place like a dictatorship for years. Folks are scared of her. You're the first to tell her no." Jack chuckled. "Didn't know I was making history." "She's not going to stop," Rick warned. "She likes control. You not joining is a threat to that." Jack shrugged. "Let her bring whatever she's got." That evening, Jack grilled ribs on his back patio and listened to Creedon's Clearwater Revival as the sun sank behind the hills. The peacefulness returned until he noticed the drone. A small, buzzing object hovered just above his property line, shifting side to side like a nosy mosquito. Jack sighed, put down his tongs, and walked inside. Moments later, he returned with a jerry-rigged signal disruptor, one of the many quiet toys he still kept from his military days. With a flick of a switch, the drone sputtered and dropped like a stone into the bushes on Karen's side. The next morning, Karen was back, this time with a sheriff's deputy in tow. "I told you I'd take action," she sneered. Jack stepped onto the porch in jeans and a black t-shirt, his muscular frame and sharp gaze enough to make the deputy falter slightly. "Morning," Jack said. Something I can help you with, officer? This woman claims you destroyed her drone, the deputy said uncertainly. Jack looked at Karen. It was on my property. Illegal surveillance. Want to check the footage? The deputy's confidence wavered further. Karen interjected, he's a threat. He's refusing to join our community. He's armed. He disabled my drone using military tech, I know it. Jack crossed his arms. Deputy, unless she's got a warrant, I suggest she stop trespassing. I'm within my legal rights. The deputy nodded slowly. Look, maybe this is a civil matter. Ms. Mathers, unless you've got more than just assumptions, I can't, Karen screamed. I'll call the real cops. The SWAT team if I have to. This man's a danger to us all. Jack didn't flinch. The deputy, annoyed now, motioned to Karen. Ma'am, let's go. You can file a formal complaint at the station. She stormed off, shrieking, You haven't seen the last of me. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Then, one morning at dawn, the sound of multiple engines roared through Whispering Pines. Black SUVs, armored vehicles, and tactical vans rolled through the gated entrance. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Dogs barked. Someone shouted, What's happening? Karen stood on her front lawn in a silk robe and slippers, positively glowing. Finally, she said, pointing toward Jack's house. There's the threat. Take him. But the convoy didn't stop at her house. It kept rolling until it reached Jack's driveway. Doors flung open. Boots hit the ground. Then the lead SWAT officer, a massive man with a squared jaw and mirrored shades, approached the porch and stood at attention. Commander Rains, he barked. It's an honor, sir. Jack stepped out of his house, arms folded, his calm presence radiating strength. Major DeWitt, Jack said, a faint smile breaking his usual reserve. Didn't expect the cavalry. Got your signal ping last week. We figured you might need backup. Karen's jaw dropped as the entire SWAT team turned in unison and saluted. Sir, they barked. Jack returned the salute. At ease. Karen stumbled forward, mouth agape. W8, he's the commander? Major DeWitt turned toward her with a chilling stare. This man led classified joint operations across 3 continents. You think you get to threaten him over lawn gnomes and trash bins? The neighbors slowly emerged, whispering, stunned. Karen looked around, suddenly alone. Jack stepped forward, looking her dead in the eye. You wanted the real cops, Karen? Well, they came. She stammered, backing up toward her house. This isn't over. Jack watched her retreat, then turned to Major DeWitt. You boys hungry? Always. DeWitt grinned. Jack grinned, stepping back toward the grill. Good. Let's eat. The morning after the SWAT team left Whispering Pines, the neighborhood was buzzing with whispers. Videos had already started circulating in the community Facebook group, shaky phone footage of armed officers respectfully saluting Jack, followed by Karen's horrified reaction. The neighborhood's collective fear of her grip began to erode like ice under a blowtorch. Karen didn't show her face the next day, but that didn't mean she was done. Jack knew better. He'd seen her kind before, not on battlefields, but in bureaucracies and war rooms. The type who used structure as a weapon, power-obsessed, vindictive, and worst of all, manipulative with the law. He didn't need Rick, the mailman, to confirm it when he dropped by that morning. She's already trying to spin the story, Rick said, placing a thick envelope in Jack's hand. Word is, she's filing some kind of community grievance, claiming you're intimidating residents, trying to turn the neighborhood into a military compound. Jack raised an eyebrow, opening the envelope. It was a formal notice from the Whispering Pines HOA Council, a committee Karen had supposedly assembled over the past 2 years. Their letter accused Jack of violating neighborhood culture and harmony, citing a security threat, unauthorized military gatherings, and disturbing the peace. He scanned the bottom. Failure to comply may result in a forced HOA review and potential escalation to county authorities. Jack smirked. She's not backing down. She's doubling down. Rick nodded grimly. This is her playground. She makes the rules here. You embarrassed her, and now she wants to ruin you. Well, Jack muttered, folding the letter neatly, then maybe it's time I return the favor. Jack wasn't one to go on the offensive without intel. He began collecting data, not with wiretaps or surveillance drones, though he had the tools, but through old-fashioned research. He drove to the county records office and requested every public filing related to Whispering Pines and its HOA status. And that's when the truth started to unravel. The HOA Karen claimed to run wasn't officially sanctioned. The community had been built without HOA bylaws registered at the county level. In fact, Whispering Pines was sold as a non-HOA neighborhood when first developed 22 years ago. Any association currently operating was unofficial and unenforceable, a voluntary club at best. But Karen had twisted it. Over time, she'd intimidated, coerced, and deceived new homeowners into thinking the HOA was binding. She bullied them into paying dues that had no legal basis. Jack leaned back in his chair at the county clerk's office, staring at copies of contracts and deeds. The conclusion was clear. Karen was running an unauthorized HOA racket, but he needed more. So he went to speak with Cheryl Morgan, a quiet, elderly widow who lived 2 houses down. She'd always seemed cautious, but Jack's respectful demeanor earned her trust quickly. "She made my life hell," Cheryl whispered, her fingers trembling. "When my husband passed, Karen fined me for having a faded wreath on the door. Said it violated visual harmony. Then she told me if I didn't pay the HOA dues, she'd report me to the city for code violations. She do that to anyone else?" Jack asked. Cheryl nodded. "She's been collecting cash dues from at least 20 houses. Nobody's seen where the money goes. People are scared, Jack." He looked at her for a long moment. "Not anymore." That night, Jack made 3 calls. First, to a buddy named Elias working in local government oversight. Second, to Major DeWitt, not for backup, but for something far more intimidating, records access. And third, to an old comrade named Priya, now a cybersecurity analyst with ties to the IRS. Over the next 48 hours, Jack gathered evidence, bank statements, hidden property tax assessments, and reports that pointed to one shocking truth. Karen had set up a fake HOA business account in her own name and had funneled over $120,000 in dues into it over 3 years. And that wasn't all. The icing on the cake came when Priya, with a sly email, sent over a PDF titled Karen_Mathers_confidential_report PDF. It was a scanned document from Karen's earlier life, a failed real estate venture in 2007 that ended in bankruptcy. But the last page? A disciplinary complaint from her time working briefly as a city zoning inspector. It accused her of falsifying fines to extort homeowners. A case that was dismissed due to insufficient evidence, but left a permanent black mark on her file. Jack sat at his desk, lit only by the glow of the laptop. His fingers tapped together, slow and deliberate. He had her, but he wouldn't strike yet. No, he wanted the neighborhood to see it for themselves. 3 days later, Jack put flyers in every mailbox in Whispering Pines. Clean, legal, and simple. They announced a community awareness meeting at the local park pavilion hosted by him. The title on the top of the flyer read, "Know Your Rights, What the HOA Isn't Telling You." The evening of the meeting, over 40 residents showed up. Even those who never left their homes or had lived under Karen's thumb for years came out, drawn by curiosity, hope, and quiet resentment. Karen arrived, too, wearing a blazer and pearls, trying to look authoritative. She brought her counsel, who looked more like nervous hostages than associates. Jack stood calmly before the crowd, microphone in hand. "I'm Jack Rains. Most of you know me as the guy who apparently runs a military compound." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "I came here to retire, not to fight. But when someone tries to force power over people who didn't agree to it, that's when I stop being quiet." He clicked his remote. The portable screen behind him lit up with a slide. Whispering Pines is not a legally registered HOA. Gasps. Slide after slide followed. County records, deeds, quotes from actual zoning officials. And then, Karen's bank records. "I didn't obtain these illegally," Jack said flatly. "They were flagged during a formal ethics review. These show where your HOA dues went. Vacations, restaurant bills, boutique shopping, none of it spent on community improvements." Karen jumped to her feet, red-faced. This is slander. He hacked my personal information. Jack calmly turned to her. The IRS doesn't call it hacking. They call it a fraud alert. You'll be hearing from them soon. The crowd erupted in murmurs and angry whispers. Then Cheryl, sweet, fragile Cheryl, stood up from the front row. She held up her HOA dues receipt and trembled as she spoke. She fined me $300 for having a pink mailbox. Said it offended the neighborhood aesthetic. It was my husband's favorite color. Voices rose. Another man shouted, "She made me pay double last year, said it was a community emergency." Karen began to retreat. Why you can't prove any of this is criminal. Just then, flashing blue lights lit up the parking lot. A black SUV pulled up, and out stepped Special Agent Rios, part of a joint task force with the FBI's White-Collar Crimes Division. He walked straight up to Jack, shook his hand, then turned to Karen. "Karen Mathers?" he asked. She froze. "You're under investigation for tax evasion, wire fraud, and impersonation of a legal governing body. We'd like you to come with us." Karen collapsed onto the grass. The crowd parted as agents guided her to the vehicle. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. Jack turned to the stunned residents. "Let's build a community worth living in, one where nobody gets bullied by power-hungry imposters." And the crowd applauded. The arrest of Karen Mathers sent shockwaves through Whispering Pines. Overnight, the woman who had ruled the community with a perfectly manicured iron fist became the talk of every kitchen table, every dog-walking pair, and every local forum post. Some residents laughed. Others felt ashamed for ever complying. And a few, a small, loyal minority, fumed. Those few were Karen's inner circle. They called themselves the Pines Preservation Committee. In truth, they were nothing more than neighborhood bullies who'd enjoyed wielding HOA power over their neighbors for years. With Karen gone, their influence crumbled fast, but they weren't ready to give it up. The ringleader was Paul Densmore, a wiry man in his late 50s with an oily voice and a tendency to hover too close when he spoke. He'd been Karen's vice president, though no one ever voted for him. Paul loved rules, fines, and surveillance almost as much as Karen did. Now, he saw Jack as the reason their empire had fallen. "First she embarrasses us with that SWAT mess," he hissed at a private meeting held in his garage. "Then she gets hauled away like a common criminal. All because of him. That vet freak who thinks he's above the law." "You saw what he did," replied Denise, another of Karen's disciples. "He turned everyone against us. People were tearing down their HOA signs yesterday, like it was a revolution." Paul slammed his hand on the folding table. "Then maybe it's time we gave him a taste of his own tactics." The following week, strange things began happening at Jack's property. It started small. Someone dumped a pile of broken branches across his driveway in the middle of the night. Then his mailbox was bent backward, as if someone had kicked it repeatedly. Security cameras caught nothing. Jack had disabled them temporarily while working on network wiring. Classic mistake. But he knew this wasn't random vandalism. This was retaliation. It escalated quickly. A letter was taped to his front door. "You think you're above the rules, soldier boy? This isn't your battlefield. Leave or we make it worse." Jack held the note in his hand, his jaw clenched. It wasn't the first time he'd been threatened. He'd faced warlords, mercenaries, and black market assassins. But this hit different. This was his home, his sanctuary. The place he'd chosen to heal, and someone was trying to poison it. He walked back inside and turned on his encrypted tablet. Time to escalate. That night, Jack made a call to someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Colonel Jonathan Pierce, retired intelligence officer and current security advisor for a private military contracting firm. "Colonel," Jack said, voice low, "I've got a domestic problem." Pierce chuckled. "You call this line for domestic problems now? You must really be losing your touch. Need a digital sweep. Covert. Fast." Pierce didn't hesitate. "I'll send my guy. Name's Waleed. Pakistani-American. Quiet genius. You'll like him." Within 24 hours, Waleed arrived, mid-30s, wire-rimmed glasses, a hoodie with a NASA logo, and a backpack full of gadgets. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Give me access to your Wi-Fi and neighborhood cell towers. I'll do a thermal scan, intercept open transmissions, and ping suspicious devices. Jack blinked. You do this often? Wally grinned. Only for friends of Colonel Pierce. And for fun. By sunset, Wally had uncovered a hidden Bluetooth relay hidden under a pine tree near Jack's fence. It was a tiny device connected to an old trail camera. Here's your culprit, Waleed said. They're spying on you. Motion-triggered camera feeding footage to a private laptop through this bridge. Wireless frequency suggests it's nearby, definitely within 2 blocks. Jack nodded. Can we trace it? Oh, I already did. The next morning, Jack walked straight up to Paul Densmore's front porch. Paul opened the door with an exaggerated look of shock. Well, if it isn't the neighborhood hero. Jack didn't blink. He held up the tiny surveillance device in one hand. Lose something? Paul's smirk faltered. Jack leaned forward. Trespassing. Illegal surveillance. Stalking. I could have the feds here in 30 minutes. You want to follow Karen into handcuffs? You can't prove. Jack pulled out his phone. Thermal records, signal logs, and surveillance timestamps. Want to see your Wi-Fi name on the capture file? Pine Rulesnet 1 clever. Paul backed into the doorway. We were just watching out for the community. Jack's voice turned cold. If I so much as hear a single nail drop on my property, I'll press charges so hard your grandkids will need lawyers. He turned and walked away. Paul slammed the door and collapsed into a chair, sweat pouring down his temples. By that afternoon, word had spread again. Residents heard about Paul's secret spying. Some, like Denise, panicked and started deleting their HOA chat groups. Others called Jack to thank him quietly, one by one. Then came the unthinkable. A group of 10 homeowners, all long-time residents, showed up at Jack's door. Cheryl was with them. We want to create something new, she said. Not an HOA, just a volunteer community board. Something real, fair, legal. Jack looked at the group. Former HOA victims, quiet rebels, tired neighbors. You don't need me to lead it, Jack said gently. I'm just a guy who wanted peace. You don't have to lead, Cheryl replied. We just want her guidance. Help us build something better. Jack nodded slowly. Then let's do it. That night, as Jack sat on his porch sipping black coffee, Waleed joined him with a grin. You know, Waleed said, in another life, you'd have made a hell of a mayor. Jack chuckled. No thanks. Politics isn't my battlefield. But communities like this? Waleed gestured to the quiet houses lit by porch lights and laughter. They're worth defending. Jack's eyes swept across the neighborhood. Kids rode their bikes again. Elderly couples walked without fear. The silence was peaceful, no tension in the air. Yet Jack said softly, they are. But as the wind rustled through the pines, Jack's military instincts tingled again, a sixth sense honed through years of combat. Because while Karen was in custody, she wasn't gone. Not yet. The first sign came in the form of silence. 3 weeks had passed since Karen's arrest. The FBI had seized her fraudulent bank accounts, county officials publicly denounced the illegal HOA she ran, and the Whispering Pines neighborhood was finally starting to breathe again. Children played outside, neighbors waved without fear, and the so-called Pines Preservation Committee had vanished. Jack Raines thought the storm was over. He was wrong. It was a Friday morning when Jack opened his mailbox and found a cream-colored envelope with a gold trim. Expensive paper, the kind lawyers liked. His name was handwritten on the front. Inside was a legal summons. Karen Elizabeth Mathers versus John Raines filing for civil harassment, property defamation, and loss of community authority. Jack read the paperwork slowly, his jaw tightening. She was suing him. Not for money, no. Karen wasn't after compensation. She was after revenge. A courtroom stage where she could twist facts, paint herself as the victim, and try to regain power through legal theatrics. Jack rubbed the bridge of his nose. He'd spent years navigating military tribunals, classified hearings, and hostile interrogations. But this was dirtier, slimier. He grabbed his phone. Rick, he said, I'm going to need a good lawyer. The best. A week later, Jack walked into a modest law office on Main Street, greeted by a tall black woman with silver-streaked dreadlocks and piercing green eyes. Her name was Maya Simmons, a civil rights attorney known across the state for dismantling corrupt housing associations and abusive city councils. "I reviewed your case," Maya said, handing him a folder. "I've dealt with a few Karens in my day, but this woman is next level. She's trying to manipulate the courts now, get her reputation back through slander." Maya nodded. "And I'm going to dismantle her, piece by piece." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You're that confident?" She smirked. "My dad was in the military. Taught me never to lose a fight that matters." The court date arrived faster than Jack expected. Word spread like wildfire, and by the morning of the hearing, the county courthouse was packed with reporters, residents, and curious onlookers. Karen had used her media contacts to spin her narrative. The unjustly arrested woman, victim of militaristic bullying and whistleblower of neighborhood aggression. She arrived dressed in a conservative navy blue suit, her blonde hair in a neat bun, a pearl necklace around her neck. Her expression? Smug. Jack wore a simple gray jacket and jeans. Beside him, Maya radiated calm professionalism. Inside the courtroom, Karen's attorney, a smug, overpaid man named Brad Holloway, strutted like he was auditioning for a courtroom drama. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," Brad began, "my client is not a criminal. She's a civic leader, a woman who sought to bring order to a disorganized neighborhood. She's now the target of coordinated harassment by a former military officer using intimidation tactics and unlawful surveillance." Jack's eyebrows rose slightly. He wanted to laugh. But Maya stood and calmly walked to the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor," she began, her voice rich and steady, "what we have here is not a case of harassment. It's a textbook example of projection. Ms. Mathers has spent years defrauding her neighbors through a fake HOA, collecting illegal fees, and harassing elderly residents. The only reason she's in this courtroom today is because my client had the courage to expose her." Maya then presented a series of damning exhibits, signed testimonies from 20 residents, photos of falsified documents, and most damning surveillance footage from Karen's own council meetings, where she bragged about scaring newcomers into compliance. Brad stuttered, trying to pivot. But this isn't a criminal trial." "No," Maya agreed, "but it does speak volumes about character, motive, and credibility." Karen's mask began to crack. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with no patience for theatrics, began to press Karen directly. "Ms. Mathers," she said, tapping her gavel lightly, "why did your HOA collect dues when there is no official charter registered with the county?" Karen swallowed. "It was a community-based agreement." "So, not legally binding?" "Well, not officially, but— and why did those funds end up in your personal bank account?" Karen went pale. Brad leapt to object, but it was too late. The judge leaned back in her chair, unimpressed. "I'll need a recess. But I'm not inclined to entertain this lawsuit much longer." Karen left the courtroom fuming. Outside, she pushed through a crowd of reporters, barking at cameras. "This isn't over. I am Whispering Pines." Jack watched from a distance, shaking his head. "She doesn't learn," he muttered. "She will," Maya replied, "once the countersuit lands." "Countersuit? Oh, yes," Maya said with a grin. "We're filing tomorrow. Fraud, elder abuse, and defamation. She wants war? Let's give her one." That night, Jack returned home to find Cheryl and several neighbors waiting on his porch with baskets of food, thank you cards, and homemade cookies. "You've done more for this neighborhood in a month," Cheryl said, "than anyone in 20 years. I didn't do it alone." "No," she smiled, "but you started it." As they talked, laughter filled the air. It reminded Jack of his squad back in the barracks after a long mission, tired, bruised, but together. He was about to head inside when a black SUV rolled up the street and parked directly in front of his house. It wasn't the FBI. Karen stepped out. No media, no followers, just her. She stood on the sidewalk, eyes locked with Jack's. "I'm not finished," she said coldly. Jack stepped to the edge of the porch. "You already were the moment you underestimated this neighborhood." She clenched her jaw. "You embarrass me. Ruin my life." You did that yourself. Her voice dropped into a venomous whisper. I know things about people here. Weaknesses. Secrets. You're not the only one who can dig. Jack's expression turned to stone. And if you think threats will scare me, then you didn't do your homework. Karen smirked. See you in court. She turned and drove off into the night. Jack watched her taillights disappear over the hill. He felt it deep in his chest, not fear, not anger. Resolve. The war wasn't over. But this time, the battlefield wasn't dirt and blood. It was truth, law, and courage. And Jack Rains didn't lose wars. Not in the desert, not in the jungle, and certainly not in Whispering Pines. The week following Karen's courthouse stunt was strangely quiet. Too quiet. Neighbors in Whispering Pines still dropped by Jack's porch with updates, cookies, and cautious optimism. The new community board, now unofficially dubbed the Whispering Pines Neighborhood Alliance, had started meeting weekly under Cheryl's guidance. Jack offered advice when asked, but mostly stayed out of the spotlight. Yet something in his gut told him it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back down after a courtroom loss. She was regrouping, planning, and he was right. It started with anonymous complaints submitted to Child Protective Services claiming multiple families in Whispering Pines were endangering their children with unsanitary living conditions. CPS arrived at 4 homes in one day. Terrified parents, crying kids, and furious neighbors demanding answers. Jack got a call from Cheryl that afternoon. She's trying to break us, she said through tears. She's not suing anymore. She's using the system to scare us. Jack nodded grimly. Weaponizing bureaucracy. That's her last play. And it's working, Cheryl said. People are scared again. Jack hung up, stepped onto his back porch, and scanned the horizon. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was about what she represented, intimidation hiding behind procedure. He made another call. Major DeWitt, Jack said. Remember that thing we talked about? The operation manual? Yeah. Time to activate it. That night, Jack and Waleed sat down with Maya Simmons and the newly formed Neighborhood Alliance. Jack unrolled a blueprint not of roads or buildings, but of legal protections, whistleblower safeguards, privacy laws, and accountability tools. This, Jack said, pointing at the center, is the new perimeter. No fences, no weapons, just knowledge, unity, and enough legal backup to make Karen run back to whatever rock she crawled from. Waleed tapped his laptop. I've created a portal, anonymous reporting system, digital complaint tracker, auto-forwarding to the real county ombudsman. Everything's time-stamped, encrypted, and logged. Maya smiled. I've already filed preemptive injunctions with CPS and county enforcement. Anyone trying to abuse the system for personal retaliation, they'll be flagged before they knock, on a single door. The group exhaled, hope blossoming again. But Jack wasn't done. I also want a town hall, he said. Public, televised, everyone invited, especially the ones still loyal to Karen. It's time we shine every spotlight on what's been happening. The town hall took place on a cool Saturday afternoon under the Whispering Pines Pavilion. Hundreds showed up, not just residents but reporters, civil rights advocates, and even local officials curious about the community that had turned into a national story. Jack stood at the front with Cheryl and Maya. Behind them were rows of seats, a large projector, and a long table of folders labeled Karen Mathers. Pattern of abuse. The presentation was simple, but devastating. A timeline of Karen's rise to power scanned fake notices with forged headers, bank statements showing misuse, dues, the CPS complaints, proven false, and finally victim testimonials, including one from Cheryl, who broke down midway through her speech and had to be held by Jack. Jack then took the mic. I fought in war zones where lawlessness ruled, where those with power crushed those without it. I swore I'd never let that happen again, especially not in my own backyard. He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. And this isn't about one woman anymore. It's about the people who stayed silent, the ones who turned away while neighbors were fined, threatened, and humiliated. That ends now. Applause erupted. Reporters scribbled notes. Phones streamed live. But then a familiar voice pierced the crowd. Touching speech, Karen said, stepping out from the shadows near the back. She wore a black blazer, a tight smile on her lips, and sunglasses she didn't need. But none of that changes the fact, she sneered, that I still own property here, and I still have rights. Maya stood up. You forfeited those rights when you began falsifying legal documents and filing fraudulent reports. Karen smirked. And you'll prove that in court? Or maybe in the court of public opinion, because I have my own evidence now. She lifted a flash drive, security footage, proof that Jack Rains threatened me with armed personnel, evidence that this so-called alliance is nothing more than a vigilante militia forming a shadow government. Jack didn't flinch. You're bluffing. Karen's smile grew wider. Oh, I never bluff, Commander. The town hall dissolved into chaos. Karen left smugly, while reporters shouted questions. Cheryl was shaking again, whispering, How did she get footage? Jack knew. That night, Wally confirmed it. She hacked our old relay, the one Paul used, found old SWAT footage, audio of tactical calls, and clipped it out of context, made it sound like you were commanding a private army. Jack sat silently for a moment, then said, Let her release it. Wally blinked. You want the public to see it? Yes, Jack said, because I know how that footage ends. And so, 2 days later, Karen uploaded her expose online. She titled it, Military Man Takes Over Quiet Suburb. Where are the police? It showed clips of tactical boots stepping onto lawns, SWAT officers addressing Jack as commander, and a moment where he calmly said, Secure the perimeter. Social media erupted, but not the way Karen hoped, because it didn't take long for the entire uncut footage to go viral. The part she forgot to erase? The moment the SWAT leader saluted Jack and said, Sir, we're here to protect you from harassment. The neighborhood's been compromised. Then Jack, captured clearly on mic, responded, No weapons drawn. No threats. This is not a military op. These are citizens. Treat them with respect. The full context changed everything. Comments flooded in. Karen tried to frame a veteran for doing the right thing. This man's a hero. She's just mad she got exposed. Whispering Pines deserves peace, not dictatorship. Local news segments flipped the narrative. Karen was publicly destroyed. Sponsors pulled out of her podcast. Her lawyer dropped her. Even her loyalists disconnected quietly, one by one. Later that week, Jack stood at the edge of the lake behind his house, watching the wind ripple the water. Cheryl walked up beside him. She's finished, she said softly. Jack didn't respond at first. Then, there's one more chapter left. The morning fog rolled in like a gentle wave over Whispering Pines, cloaking the streets in a thin silver mist. The air was calm, eerily calm, the kind of peace that usually arrives after a long, bitter storm. Jack stood outside his home in a crisp black jacket, sipping coffee as the sun started to pierce through the haze. It had been 3 days since Karen's downfall went viral. Her name had become synonymous with abuse of power and digital manipulation. In a poetic twist, the HOA she'd once weaponized was now a symbol of community resilience. But Jack knew that symbolic victories were only half the battle. He had one last mission. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up slowly. Sheriff Ray Vickers stepped out and walked toward Jack with something in his hands, a folded envelope and a leather badge holder. I thought you might want these back, Ray said. Technically, they were never turned in. And considering the service you've rendered here, Jack looked down at the Federal Task Force badge, then at the envelope. Inside it were official reinstatement papers, a quiet offer from Homeland Security urging him to return. Apparently, his presence had impressed more than just the neighbors. Jack closed the envelope and handed it back. I'm done fighting, he said, at least the way I used to. Ray nodded. Then what will you do now? Jack looked around. Bill, that afternoon, the entire neighborhood gathered at the community center, a place that had once served as Karen's command post of paranoia and power. Now it was being renamed the Rains Civic Center. Cheryl gave the opening speech. This place used to be about control, she said. Now it's about cooperation. And we owe that to a man who taught us not to be afraid. She turned toward Jack, who was standing near the back wall, arms crossed, uncomfortable in the spotlight. Wally nudged him. Go on, Commander. The crowd clapped, chanting, "Commander Jack! Commander Jack!" Jack finally stepped up. He held the mic in his calloused hands, cleared his throat, and looked out over the sea of faces. Families, retirees, teens, even some of Karen's former allies, now wearing volunteer shirts. "You all know my past now," he said. "I've worn a lot of uniforms, seen the worst of humanity. But this has been the hardest mission I've ever taken." He paused, because this wasn't a war zone. This was home. Silence filled the air. Jack continued, "I didn't want to lead. I didn't want to fight. I wanted to heal. But sometimes healing requires surgery, cutting out the rot before it spreads." He glanced toward the back, where, for the first time, Karen stood alone. No guards, no minions, no clipboard, just her and a county officer escort. Her eyes locked with Jack's, and he said, directly to her, but loud enough for everyone to hear, "You tried to make this place yours by force. I made it ours by unity." Karen turned away. The officer placed a hand gently on her arm and walked her out. No cuffs, no shouting, just complete surrender. Weeks passed, life resumed in Whispering Pines, but better. The HOA, now renamed the Neighborhood Care Council, operated under transparency laws Jack had helped implement. Dues were reduced, rules were fair. Neighbors had weekly brunch meetings and community cleanups, often led by Cheryl and Waleed. Jack rarely attended. He preferred his quiet dock behind the house, fishing rod in hand, Daisy the golden retriever at his feet. But he kept a radio, just in case. One evening, a black SUV rolled up Jack's driveway. It wasn't government-issued this time. A woman stepped out, Maya Simmons. She smiled as she approached, holding a thick file. "You're going to want to see this," she said. Jack took the folder and opened it. Inside, applications from 17 nearby communities, all asking for help transitioning away from corrupt HOAs into democratically managed councils. They'd heard about Whispering Pines. They wanted guidance. They wanted him. Maya raised an eyebrow. "You up for one more tour of duty, Commander?" Jack looked out at the horizon, then at the file, then said simply, "Let's build a new map." Epilogue. 1 year later, news crews gathered outside a converted government building now painted soft yellow with green shutters. The sign read, "Community Command, Founder." Jack Rains, a televised reporter, smiled into the camera. Once labeled a rogue veteran leading a suburban insurrection, Jack Rains has since become a national consultant for neighborhood reform. His model has now been implemented in 46 states, and today he receives the Presidential Medal of Civil Contribution. Inside, Jack stood awkwardly as the president placed the medal around his neck. Cheryl, Waleed, Maya, and Sheriff Ray all clapped proudly. But Jack's eyes drifted to the crowd, to a small group of kids in Whispering Pines school uniforms, waving handmade signs that read, "Thank you, Commander." A tear slid down Jack's cheek, and for the first time in a long, long while he saluted back.